We're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you all for coming. We as CACE are very excited to have you here today. My name is Sabrina McGraw. I am the recently elected president of CACE. For those who do not know, CACE is a nonprofit organization dedicated to promoting civic education in California, and with a particular focus on this We the People program. We are made up of a bunch of different volunteers who are either currently in California or were California at some point, but are tuning in from somewhere else because we all care very deeply about this program. As you'll hear from some of us, some of us are alumni. I'm an alumni from the program from 2013. I was at Amador and I was in Unit 5. Now I am an attorney working in San Francisco, and I've been involved with this program for several years now. And we're really excited to have you here today. This is the Jumpstart first program of the year, where we can help you understand what this program is about and why it's amazing. This is a really great opportunity for you to learn about what's going on in the world, develop really excellent oral and presentation skills, as well as research skills. And we think this program is partially what we hope will make the future a better place. So I'm going to allow everyone who is a CACE volunteer to introduce themselves so you can get a sense of who will be helping you out. And then I'll give you an overview of what we're going to be doing today in the first summer session. So can I have Clint introduce himself?
Sure. Hi, thank you, Sabrina. My name is Clint Woods. I am an alum of the program back from 1995, which is a very long time ago. We won the national title, but that's no longer a big deal anymore. So because we do it all the time now, which is great. I am currently a Deputy Attorney General for the state of California in the Government Law Division. My job is basically to defend the state of California against constitutional challenges, sue the federal government when we need to, and do a bunch of other stuff. In the meantime, I've been involved in CACE for a very, very long time. It is one of my favorite things to do, and I'm also on the board of directors.
Great. Can I have Sean introduce himself?
Hi, good morning, everyone. My name is Sean Gentry. I am also an alumni of the program. I graduated in 2002. Oh, and my toddler heard me talking, and here she comes. So I have a toddler, and I'm also an attorney as my day job. I am an employment law attorney, mostly a litigator, but I also advise employers on all the rules in California. I've been volunteering with this program for quite a while, since at least 2007 when I started law school. And this has been a big part of my life for a long, long time, and I'm excited to share this journey with all of you this year.
Great. Can I have Zoe introduce herself?
Hi, everyone. My name is Zoe. I'm also an alum of the program. I graduated Amador in 2019. I was in Unit 1, and obviously I'm still here today. So We the Peoples have been a really big deal for my life. I'm currently a rising senior at Cornell. I'm studying government and history, hopefully applying to law school this fall. So you guys can see how that goes. And I am, pending approval, very excited to be on the board of directors as well for CACE.
Great. And then Aaron.
Hi guys, my name is Aaron. I'm also an alumni from 2019, but from Foothill, other side of town. I'm currently at UC Davis, where I'm studying environmental science and political science and environmental policy. And CACE is an awesome program. Very excited to work with you guys this year and, helping out any way I can.
Harsha.
Okay, I feel like this is the worst time. Can you guys hear that? Hopefully you can still hear me.
You got car alarm bombed there.
We can hear you still.
Go ahead. I think you'll find it.
I'm gonna go ahead anyways. I'm sorry about that. So my name's Harsha. There we go. Okay, Harsha, alumni of Foothill Unit 1, 2019. I went to American University where I studied political science, and I just graduated this past May. And now I'm working for the US Senate's Committee on Commerce, Science, and Transportation.
All right, thanks everyone. We are also joined today by several wonderful recently graduated alumni, but I'm going to let them introduce themselves later as they go on a panel. So moving right along to our next part of the agenda, we are joined today with a very special guest. Donna Phillips is here. She is the Vice President and Chief Program Officer of the Center for Civic Education, and she's going to tell you a little bit about what's going on at the national level for the We the People program. So I'm going to pass it along to her. Thanks, Donna, for being here.
Sure. Thank you for having me. Yeah, I joined the center at the national level in April, and so I was able to participate in our virtual national finals as one of the first things that I got to do. That's my new fancy title, but prior to that, I worked for District of Columbia Public Schools, where I led, among other things, the integration of We the People in grades 4, 8, and 12. And most importantly, before that, I was a social studies teacher for both middle and high school. And so for 11 years, my social studies team and I incorporated We the People simulated hearings for over 400 eighth graders in my middle school. And then when I switched to high school, I coached the Maryland state winning team for 4 years for We the People. And so I've been actively involved with We the People and the center's programs for over 20 years. And it's really exciting to be able to lead this work at the national level. As you may or may not know, so every April we hold a national finals competition where the state champion teams from every state, most states, join us. It's been virtual the last 3 years, and we are going to be holding it in person again this coming year. We're really, really excited to come back to an in-person national finals. What was really exciting at the national level too was that in 2020, when everything in the world shut down, We the People and the center were probably, I think, the only, if not, and maybe just one of the only, but definitely the only organization that still held its seminal national event. So we had our national finals. We had to structure it a little bit differently, but we figured out in a matter of months how to hold virtual hearings, and so that all the students and their hard work they'd been doing all year could still be honored, even as, you know, most of the students weren't even going to school regularly by the time we held the virtual finals for the first time. So that really shows you just how dedicated we at the center and your teachers and your CACE group here, and we all are, about how dedicated we are towards your civic education and how important we think this program is. And it's really phenomenal what a strong tradition both your schools have and that California has too. So first of all, what an amazing opportunity to be able to engage in your constitutional learning, not just during the school year and during We the People season, but also for you to be able to get a jump start this summer for what you're going to be learning all year long. And what you're learning this summer in the school year will stay with you for the rest of your life. You are proof positive of what a life-changing impact We the People has on everyone involved, and the alumni here are proof positive of that as well. And as you may know, and you'll learn more this week and in subsequent weeks about the structure of the hearings, we have judges and scholars and people from all across the political spectrum in community and government organizations, elected officials, college professors. They come back year after year because they value and understand how important this civic education is, and just want to make sure that the next generation and every subsequent generation gets this opportunity. So that again just kind of solidifies how important it is to all of us, for you, and how much impact what you're about to engage in will have on your lives and others. So I have a couple pieces of advice from my role now, but mostly from when I was a teacher and working with students like you for many years. And your own teachers, when you get into the school year, will also have, all the ways they're going to prepare you for the hearings and also just engage with you throughout the year in your own civic learning. So none of this is in contradiction to anything that might happen during the school year, but I hope you'll take some of this advice and think about it, and maybe remember it, at some point while you're preparing for the different levels of hearings and just when you're learning about all the things that are part of the We the People program. Okay, so the first thing I'll say is We the People takes you into so much more depth about our constitutional democracy and its history than your typical government course, or even more so than an advanced placement government course. One of the true advantages it gives that We the People gives its students and participants is a really rich understandings of the political philosophies. And you'll be hitting some of that later in the summer. And whenever that gets incorporated into your curriculum for the school year, understand that it's a really unique perspective to have. So here are some of my other pieces of advice in no particular order. And I hope you'll ask me some questions when I'm finished. And I'm really excited to see what you're thinking about when you go in, as you're going into your learning this week and then this school year. So first of all, as you're learning everything about government and our political system and our constitutional history, pick a lens. So there are lots of ways you can do this. One of them is like, what would James Madison say? Or what would a founder say? So as you're learning different current events, historical events, different concepts, things that happened, before Madison's time, after Madison's time, what would Madison say about that? Just, based on what you know about him and his philosophies and his role. I just picked Madison. It could be anybody. What would Cincinnatus say about that? What would Aristotle say about that? What would someone currently today say about whatever it is you're learning? And being able to apply a lens that way gives you, it's just a new way to think about ideas from more than one perspective, but also gives you a historical or contemporary perspective to apply. Another type of lens would be Federalists versus anti-Federalists. So once you get into those deep philosophies on both sides and the arguments and the documents that guided the debates over the ratification of the Constitution, just about everything that happens and has happened since can have a Federalist point of view on it and an anti-Federalist point of view. Everything from, the most recent Supreme Court decisions to, what might be happening in your homeowners association decision, to how we are interacting with foreign countries. So that could be a lens, Federalists versus anti-Federalists, or something like individual rights versus the common good, or more specifically, natural rights philosophy versus classical republicanism. And the reason why it would be good to have a lens is because no matter what unit you end up competing in, you can bring that lens to bear. And judges love to see when, even if you are part of Unit 5 or Unit 3 or something where it's very specific about, the powers of Congress or, freedom of speech or assembly, if you can bring in other things that show your breadth and depth of knowledge across the curriculum, not just the topic you're testifying on, the judges are really going to know and see your depth of understanding. And what this program is all about, and what we hope comes out in the hearings, is your true depth of knowledge. So applying those lenses, even when it's not a topic in your unit, is one way to do that. And it's one way for you, when the hearings are done, to continue to think about all the things that you'll experience and know about what happens in our regular lives. To this day, when I see headlines, my first thought is, what would an anti-Federalist say about that? Or was this more of a Federalist decision or anti-Federalist? That's just me. So pick a lens and use that to filter all the things that you're learning. You will learn the Constitution inside and out. It's important to know the Constitution. When you write your speeches, you'll reference very specific things in the Constitution to the extent that it makes sense to do so. But you don't have to be an encyclopedia of the Constitution when you're talking about it in the follow-up questions, or when you're, talking about your working knowledge of it. This kind of falls in lines of a hack, but if you start a sentence with "in the Constitution," you don't have to cite the exact thing. You can if you know it, but it's more important that you show that you understand the clause or the principle in the Constitution. And some of the units are more Constitution heavy than others, but there are always constitutional principles that apply across all the units. So state what the idea in the Constitution, the clause, the Commerce Clause, Eminent Domain Clause, Search and Seizure Clause, and you might know those, but if you don't, but it's in there, you should always say that it's in there. This will help those of you taking AP government as well. Go hard on federalism. I think federalism is the least understood but most relevant and impactful aspect of our constitutional democracy. Think about our 50 states plus our District of Columbia and how different each and every state is, and how they manage their own state powers. Everything that happens is an exercise. Everything that happens in our government is an exercise in our federal system. And what does that actually mean? I mean, our country is so unique because of the way we've organized and the structure of our federal system. So think about what Amendment 9 and Amendment 10 mean, what the necessary and proper clause mean, and everything from more benign decisions around like the seatbelt law and the national speed limit, versus Supreme Court decisions like Brown versus the Board of Ed, and the need for a Supreme Court decision to end segregation because state governments weren't doing it on their own. Like, federalism is so fascinating. And so the deeper you understand that, again, no matter what unit you're in, bring federalism to bear as much as you can. It could be it could be your lens. But even if it's not, it's something that if you understand it inside and out, you will always understand what's happening in our country and why, and the constitutional implications and applications. It'll also really super duper help you on the AP government exam. AP government loves federalism. As you're thinking about all the things you're learning, it's really fun to think about what if. One of the favorite things some judges like to ask, and I always like to ask my students, what if we didn't have judicial review? How would life be different? How would this decision be different? How would we still protect rights? Think about this Supreme Court decision that just happened. And if we didn't have judicial review, could we get the same outcomes? There's really great what if scenarios. And so a lot of times we see what happens in our country and our government, and we just, okay, this is just how it happened. But what if we didn't have this system? What if we weren't structured this way? And there are countries who aren't. And so we can kind of see how things might be different. But it's always great to play what if and to go into that abstract space, because our government can change and our structures can change, and decisions change when we have different political powers in office. And so the what if game is really interesting. What if we had a parliamentary system instead of a congressional system? That's another great what if. It takes some digging and thinking through how decisions might be made differently or how outcomes might be different. So apply the what if lens to your learning and your discussions with each other. At some point, I'm not sure how early on your teachers will do it, but you'll be organized into groups and teams to work on your specific unit and your speeches. And so everything I just said before, these are great conversations and things to do within your teams, with each other, and then also as a whole class. When you start working on your individual speeches, and again, your teachers might have different ways of doing this, but I always liked to have every student write a rough draft to the entire speech, not just divide and conquer. You have to know the totality of your unit. And then you end up getting more specialized in certain things within your speech and within your topic, but always start with the big picture. When you write that first draft as a team, let it be as long as it needs to be. if you're bringing in an example or a case or a current event, write until it makes sense, write into the question, write your way into the topic. Don't worry about length or timing or conciseness or any of that. At the same time, you do not need a single fluffy sentence. Every sentence should have meaning and direct connection back to the questions being asked. This process, if you're not already a great writer, will teach you to be a concise, powerful writer. It really is, I think, the best process for becoming a very powerful writer. Those college essays you write, they're going to benefit from your experience writing We the People speeches, because you'll know how to get to the point to make an impact with what you say, but you're not going to get there right away. So flesh out your ideas in writing, let them come, and then you'll start editing it down, taking out the fluff. You're not going to be able to keep in every example you initially put in. It's going to feel like cutting off an appendage when you have to remove a case or a current event because you're running out of time. But rather than spend a long time elaborating on one thing, you should pair that up with short mentions of cases or examples to show that you understand the question and have examples for it. And also still try to include a little bit of elaboration on a more meaningful example. Try to balance those two things. One strategy I always work with my students on was, if you don't have time to fully explain an example, a case, a historical event that relates to the question, leave that near the end of the speech. End the speech with a question. And a lot of times, because of the recency effect, the judges, in addition to the questions they might have prepared to ask you, will remember the last thing that you said and say, oh, I want you to elaborate more on what you said. And so there's ways you can kind of plant in there the types of things you want the judges to ask you about afterwards. Now, in contrast to that advice, though, make sure you do answer the judge's question. You can relate just about anything you have researched and talked about to what the judges are going to ask you, but make sure you still link it back to their initial question. So that's a real skill, and that's something that you'll practice in your classes. The last piece of advice is about team dynamics. And again, once your teachers organize you into teams, you'll have different ways that you'll think about going about the work. But I always like to have my students specialize once they were on their teams. So you would have someone who was the constitutional scholar. Now that person can contribute in that way to the speech, but also on follow-ups. So that was sort of like their lens on the team was, okay, how does this relate to the Constitution, whether it's a follow-up question or a part of the speech. The historian. So, you all have probably taken other history classes, US history, world history. Bring all of that. Just because you're not learning it directly this year in We the People doesn't mean you can't draw from all the history you know or could possibly research to relate to what you're learning in We the People. The devil's advocate. So this might be present in your speech where you show the other side. Everyone on your team might agree one way, but you should always show that you understand the other point of view, even if it's not yours. And then certainly in follow-ups, you might have someone respond to a question and that devil's advocate can jump in and say, well, I agree. The other side of this is this. Always know what that other side could be and have that person jump in and play the devil's advocate. You need a copy editor, someone who's really good at making sure that when you're pulling together everyone's ideas, the voice sounds consistent. You're getting that speech down to the 4-minute mark. Someone who can take responsibility for that. And I had one other role, and that is the risk taker. So when that judge asks that super complex question, which we tell them not to ask a multi-part question, but sometimes they will, who's the risk taker who's going to be able to speak first and give everyone else a chance to think and process before they can also jump in and contribute. So those were lots of different types of roles, just some ideas there. And that's it. I could go on because my favorite part about being a civic educator was working with my We the People students. But I would love to know if there's any questions, and happy to answer them and follow up on anything I said. Thank you all for being here, and congratulations.
Thank you, Donna. Does anyone have any questions? Feel free to raise your hand via the Zoom feature, or you can also put it in the chat. Okay, well, it looks like nobody has any questions for now, but if you have some later, I have Donna's contact information. I can reach out to her if that's something the CACE board can't answer as well. Thank you so much, Donna, for speaking today. That was hugely helpful, tons of great advice. I encourage all of you students to go back and look at this recording once you get started in the year, because everything she said is going to be absolutely crucial for having a great year in CACE. So thanks so much, Donna.
Sure. Good luck. Thanks.
All right. And now we are going to turn it over to Aaron, who's going to go over the very basics of how a hearing works. So let me spotlight him. Let's see. Cool. All right. Take it away, Aaron.
All right. Hi, everyone. I'm actually going to share my screen. You should all have access to this document as well, but this is going to go over a little bit of what the basics of a We the People program is, what you're going to be doing in the actual competitions, and what you're going to be working towards for most of the year. So Donna mentioned a lot about the different units, and this is something that you guys are going to have a little bit of experience with by this point. All of the work that you've been doing over the summer, all the homework you've been doing, that textbook is going to directly mirror the units that you'll be broken up into over the year. So there are going to be 6 different units, and this is a little graphic that CACE has come up with to kind of describe how those units interact with one another. Typically, Unit 1 is considered the philosophical unit. It's going to be a lot of philosophy ranging from Aristotle in ancient Greece to modern day philosophers. And they're going to be all the different perspectives on governance and rights and all these different philosophical perspectives that form the basis of our government and our political thought today. And so Unit 1 will really influence every unit. They're going to be particularly experts in philosophy, but every unit can draw from these philosophical concepts and really enrich their own testimonies and feedback or hot seat. Unit 2, 3, 4, and 5 are going to be more focused on different aspects of the current United States political system and the way that it operates between federalism and the way that it operates between the Bill of Rights. And so, for example, Unit 2 focuses on the framing of the Constitution. This is a historical unit a lot of the time, and this unit's going to know a lot of the history behind the founding of the Constitution. They're going to know the framers very well. They're going to know their particular opinions on certain issues, who was a Federalist, who was an Anti-Federalist, who believed what, and who didn't believe any of it. Things like that are going to be what Unit 2 focuses on. And so you can also pull from Unit 2 because mentioning what the framers thought can be useful in every unit, even if you're not in Unit 2. Unit 3 focuses on voting, due process, equal protection, and the Civil War, but that can be more concisely said as the 15th Amendment. So the 15th Amendment, as you guys will kind of focus on a lot, very much changed the United States Constitution, and Unit 3 will be going deep into how that looks like and how that works. And so there are a lot of different equality and voting rights and civic processes that changed with that. Unit 3 looks a lot at how those happened. Unit 4 is institutions of the US government, which is going to focus a lot on a few different things. They're going to focus on Congress and how Congress functions day to day, how Congress's policies impact the way that Congress functions and the way that Congress makes decisions. They're going to do that same kind of process for the presidency and the executive branch, and then look at how those two branches interact with each other. So all of those institutions that are formed, more so the executive and legislative, because Unit 5 is going to be focusing the most on the judicial. So as you guys might have heard before, Unit 5 has a lot of focus on case law and the Bill of Rights and the Supreme Court and their decisions that they've made over the years. And so if you're in Unit 5, typically you will know a lot of case law, you will know a lot of different legal jargon and legal concepts that are kind of more nuanced and specific to how the Supreme Court makes decisions, the different standards that the Supreme Court uses to make these decisions. And then Unit 6 is going to be my unit, which is the best unit. because you get to combine all of these things together. So Unit 6 applies everything from the current US government to the philosophical foundings of the US government, and it applies these to the modern world. So you look at problems that the United States is facing today, which there are no shortage of, and then you also get to look at international problems sometimes. You get to look at international perspectives on governance and how, what would it look like if we didn't have the United States' very specific constitutional democracy? How do other constitutional democracies work, and how do those work in relationship to the United States'? And so Unit 6 will be combining all of these topics, and you won't be focusing very specifically on any one branch of the US government or any one policy area, but you'll kind of be a jack of all trades, which is why I love Unit 6. But now let's look a little bit more at what the actual congressional hearing, also known as testimony, would look like. So this is the meat of the program. This is what you guys will be building towards. Over the year, you'll start by doing your districts and regionals competitions, where you'll be competing mostly against each other, as well as Irvington, possibly, I don't know. But that'll be a local competition, which will let you get your feet wet, let you start getting comfortable with how this hearing and testimony system works. And then you guys will compete at states in the winter. And hopefully, if that goes well, if you guys succeed at states and take a high place, you'll get to compete at the national level, where you'll again be doing this same exact structure. It'll be the hearing, followed by the question and answer, followed by the feedback. As Clint said, the regional competition is also for the CACE belt, which is the best prize you can win, as my team did in 2019. And it's a lot of fun. So we'll start with the introductions. This is going to be something that you guys will start getting down as soon as you are in your units and you start practicing. It'll become robotic. You'll hear it in your sleep. You'll hear it everywhere you go. It's going to be you introducing yourself to the judges. The judges will introduce themselves to you, and then they will let you know which question you're working on. So every time that you go to a competition, there will be a set of 2 or 3 questions that are offered to you. So here's what's offered. This is going to be the district questions. These stay the same for every year, for every state. And so, for example, each unit will have 3 different questions. And these 3 questions, you'll prepare a testimony for. You'll prepare answers to hot seat questions, or what does Amador call them? Is it a hot seat for Amador? It's okay. There are different names for. It's Q&A. That's what it is. There are different names for these parts of the testimony and congressional hearing. But for example, each question will typically be a 3-part question. So you'll have the overarching question. So in this case, how did both classical republicanism and the natural rights philosophers influence the founders' views about government? And then they'll have 2 follow-up questions. In this case, what are the essential differences between classical republicanism and natural rights philosophy? And why do both classical Republicans and natural right philosophers stress the need for education and preparation for citizenship? So when the judge presents you your question, you'll know which testimony you'll be using to answer, and you'll have written that testimony already. So this is a prepared statement. A lot of the time you spend in this class will either be writing your testimony or preparing for question and answer. But the testimony is going to be a 4-minute speech that your unit prepares together. So you'll bounce from person to person, and you'll answer all 3 of the questions that are mentioned in the document. You can pull from any sources you like. You can pull from any examples you like, as long as it's relevant to the question. And your teachers will give you lots of feedback in how to be as relevant as possible, how to be as concise as possible. All of those different things you guys will kind of practice as you write testimonies throughout the year. I was one of the main testimony writers for my unit, and it's definitely a great writing experience, like the vice president just mentioned, and it's going to be a great experience on how to focus on your conciseness of writing, how to articulate your ideas really clearly. The other aspect of the competition that's going to be the other bulk of your time throughout the year is the question and answer section. So this is as compared to the testimony, which typically most units are going to read off the paper. Some units do also memorize their testimonies, depending on where you are and who your teacher is. But question and answer is always going to be no notes, no cheat sheets, just you and your unit and the knowledge you guys have built up over the year. And so you'll be in a panel of 3 judges who will ask you questions that relate to the question that you were posed, but they can also go off on tangents. And so this is where you really get to demonstrate your knowledge. You get to bring in your favorite unique examples that are relevant to the question, your favorite concerning materials that are your favorite court cases, all of those different things, and they'll ask different questions like that. So for the question we were just looking at, which was about classical Republicans and natural rights philosophers, a judge could ask a question that's more simple. For example, how did natural rights philosophy feel about voting rights, or how did natural rights philosophers feel about citizenship? And then they could also ask harder questions that are, related to their line of work in particular. A lot of judges will kind of pull from their specific focus and say, well, how would a natural rights philosopher feel about environmental policy, for example, which is something you might be less prepared for, and you kind of have to pull from your knowledge to try to make an answer that looks at that question. So then your hearing will finally end with some feedback from the judges. At this point, they will give you the pros of what you did, the cons of what you did, the answers they liked, the answers they liked less, and you'll take notes, or your teacher will take notes. And this is all helpful in how you guys go forward and continue learning from your mistakes and successes that you've had so far. So finally, this is just what it looks like. In a congressional hearing, you're going to have a panel of students where you're all sitting in one table. The judges will be facing opposite you, so you'll be speaking to them as if you were in Congress and sitting at your congressional desk and speaking to the large panel of Congress members. And then your audience will be to the side, and they'll be watching and supporting you, but quietly. So that is the basics of what testimony and hot seat and Q&A look like. You guys will get a lot of practice with this over the year. So if it seems overwhelming, don't worry. Those 2 programs are what you're going to be practicing for most of the rest of the class, as well as your enriching with the learning. So I hope that was a helpful kind of basis on what it looks like to be in a unit, what it looks like to be in testimony and hot seat. If you guys have any questions, feel free to ask, but we'll be seeing some mock testimonies later today, which will give you a better idea of what it looks like and, the questions that could be asked.
All right, great. Thanks, Erin. Does anyone have any questions? Feel free to put it in the chat right now. Okay, great. So we're making excellent time. So I wanted to ask, is the alumni who are presenting next, is everyone here and ready to go to the next section? We're a little bit ahead of time.
I believe that everyone who's presenting testimony is here. I'm not sure about the judges panel though.
Okay.
I believe that everyone for the panel, the judging panel, is also here.
All right, excellent. So we're going to move right along then. We are gratefully joined today by, as I mentioned before, several alumni who were recently graduated from different schools and who are going to be presenting today on a sample hearing, and also they'll be serving as the panel of judges as well. So I'm going to let them introduce themselves, but for now I would like everyone who may have their camera on right now to turn it off, and then set your setting to gallery mode, and make sure that you have the setting on so that you don't see non-participants in the window. That way you'll be able to see the panel who is speaking as well as the judges. That will be the only people on your screen. So I ask everyone who's not on that panel to do that setting now. All right, and now I'm just going to hand it off to the alumni panel to get started.
Hi, okay, I guess I'll go first. We'll just go around. So I'm Lily. I am a recent alum from Foothill. I was in Unit 5, and I'm going to be one of the presenters today.
Hi, I'm Varuna V. I'm also a recent alum from Foothill, and I was Unit 1. I'm presenting today.
Hi, I'm Claire Chrysler. I was also an alum from Foothill High School from Unit 6, and I'm presenting today. Yeah.
Hi, I'm William. I'm from Unit 1 Amador, and I share the privilege of being able to call Clint a fellow national champion.
Okay, my name is Michael. I am a Foothill alumni of Unit 1, and I will be judging today.
Hi, I'm Anna. I'm an alumni of Foothill, and I am a member of Unit 3, and I'll be judging today.
Hi, my name is Margaret, and I'm a recent alum from Amador Valley High School's Unit 6, and I'm also a national champion.
Okay. Shall I read your question for you today?
That would be wonderful.
So your question today is, what is We the People? How did We the People impact your understanding of rights, responsibility, and citizenship? You may begin when you are ready.
In April of 2022, days before nationals, Foothill coach Jeremy Denimore presented his class with a question: how have you changed as a person since August? With only a simplistic understanding of We the People, or Comp Civics for the Dons, this question may seem larger than the class itself. However, each Foothill and probably Amador student has a greater amount to say by the end of the year.
At CACE, this class is a year-long study of our Constitution, government, and related philosophies. Students are divided into 6 units with their own topic of focus and compete with the other schools based on their understandings. At each level of competition, units have about 2 months to prepare multiple written presentations, much like this one, based on their competition questions, and to prepare for the subsequent Q&A or hot seat given by judges who hope to explore a team's knowledge.
But more than that, this class is a transformative experience. Michael Hubbard, Foothill Unit 1 alum, said that the experience clarified his conversational technique, guiding both his thought process and speaking style. Additionally, to paraphrase the respective ideas of Foothill Unit 2 alum Rohan Penmacha and Amador Unit 5 alum Yash Totale, the clash is a journey one can begin with near strangers, but end with lifelong friends. They are not alone with this sentiment. In essence, We the People is a transformative experience in which students improve as critical thinkers, orators, and as friends.
We the People's impact on our understanding of rights, responsibility, and citizenship varies based on our unit perspectives. As a Unit 5 alum, my understanding became grounded in the Bill of Rights. I grew to understand the balance of the First Amendment religion clauses. I had to think critically about how a penumbral protection of privacy might not be enough. I studied racial disparities in 5th, 6th, and 7th Amendment due process and became disillusioned with the strength of the Bill of Rights. And now, emerging from this class in a time where these same areas of study are being altered by the Supreme Court, it is only because of We the People that I am truly an engaged citizen. While I may have understood the ruling of Dobbs v. Jackson last year, I may not have understood others like Vega v. Teco, which altered Miranda law by granting police officers immunity when rights are not read. Essentially, I am a better citizen for my greater understanding of our rights.
Unit 6's study of international conflicts and governments has given me a vast perspective on the fragility and the variation of rights, responsibilities, and citizenship worldwide and within the US as well. This class has taught me that it is our responsibility as citizens to hold our government accountable for the crimes we have committed worldwide. Additionally, although the US is privileged with the rights we do have under the Constitution, we are living through a harsh from autonomy, Native American rights, same-sex marriage, the right of privacy are all currently under fire.
From a Unit 1 perspective, this program teaches that there is no universally agreed truth about anything, and especially not about what human rights everyone deserves. With opinions on what rights people deserve varying from person to person, there are no real protections for what rights are. Thus, it is the individual's responsibility to discern truths for themselves and fight for what they believe in, and to do as much research as necessary to form individual opinions about what rights are necessary and proper.
As a kid, the word citizenship felt insignificant. After Comp Civics, our classes have discovered the responsibility that comes with the simple word. I've come to value Aristotle's philosophical definition of citizenship, defined in his Politics, which asserted that citizenship is functional rather than legal. It is a person who is actively involved in community and government. Comp Civics has inspired me to truly become a citizen by this definition.
To answer Coach Dedimore's question, we've all become better people this year because We the People has taught us that it is our responsibility as citizens to utilize rationality and critical thinking to protect what rights we do have in order to gain the rights we don't. However, this understanding of citizenship, responsibility, rights, and government is not something one must gain overnight. The knowledge and experience come naturally with time. This program has a grasp on people like none other. It's got us all hook, line, and sinker starting on day one. Thank you.
Thank you for your amazing testimony. I just want to ask you, you guys seem to mention a lot of things you learned throughout the year. This sounds kind of overwhelming. Was the process of learning these things overwhelming, or did it kind of come naturally? Why or why not?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say it's definitely kind of a mix between the two. I remember for me personally, on our first day of units, we got presented with a 22-page document of court cases, which was extremely overwhelming in that moment. And I personally did not know how we were going to manage that. But throughout the year, you realize that you know so much more than you think, and it is a gradual process over time. And you're absolutely not isolated in that experience because you're working with your unit along the way.
So something to note is that you tend to fall in love with this class. So all the work that you do doesn't really feel like work, especially when you're doing all this work as a team with people that you love and respect. All of this work becomes something that comes naturally and something that becomes a part of your daily or weekly routine. So although some program somewhat takes over your life, it's in the best way possible.
I would like to second all of that. And as you guys have heard, Weeble can be a very overwhelming experience at the beginning, but as you go on, you realize that with your team, it is a 4, 3, 5-person job, and you are all working together to achieve the same goal. And it's not like other classes where you have due dates and assignments that you don't want to do. You're all working on topics that you're genuinely interested in and you genuinely want to learn about at your own pace and with the guidance of teachers. So even though it seems overwhelming in the beginning, as you go, it just becomes fun and organic, and it's just an overall amazing experience.
Personally, I think that it definitely varies by the stage of the competition. I remember for like especially districts and regionals, I felt pretty overwhelmed simply because like as unit one, as an alum from unit one, like the amounts of philosophy is so vast. I think like once like after like districts or regionals, once your fundamentals are down, like your ability to like discern information and sift through what's relevant and what isn't increases so much, especially when you hit states and hopefully nationals.
Let's take that a step further though, right? You gain this base of understanding through this districts and district regionals and states time. You get to use that at your nationals. When you go past that, where are you right now? And where do you see that understanding that you have playing out? Like, I know you talked about how, Lily, you talked about how you're using it to interpret Supreme Court cases, but how do you see that in your everyday life in media or in the way you interpret the world?
Well, specifically for Unit 6, since we focus so much on studying modern and current world events, I have seen that easily transfer into my everyday life because watching the news and reading articles that are just discussing most recent events have become a part of my daily routine. So it's just something that you kind of adapt and you continue through your everyday life. And for me, that it just made sure that I am more aware of what's not just happening in the US, but worldwide as well.
To be completely honest, if you asked me even 2 years ago about simple questions about the government, like how many people are in the Senate, how many are in the House, I probably would not be able to answer these questions. And through Weeble and this like wonderful, amazing program, I've been able to become more aware of the government that encompasses and affects us all in our day-to-day lives. And through this, I've become more aware of what I can do to like create change in my day-to-day life and why this is like so important.
Personally, so like Claire, I tend to read the news daily now, but I think with my newfound civic knowledge, I think it's way easier to be able to take the information I read and actually make assessments about instead of just blindly following whatever flashy headline that permeates new media today. And I think this reason, I think the biggest benefit is just to be able to critically think for yourself and not blindly following whatever you see on the internet.
Throughout your time in We the People, how have you found it to be effective? In what effective ways have you found in developing your understanding of rights, responsibility, and citizenship, especially in a competitive We the People sense?
Yeah, so I think that for me, the main kind of way that I've been able to so strongly develop my new understanding of rights, responsibility, and citizenship has pretty much been through discussing with my unit mates, discussing with classmates, and spending those hours that aren't necessarily required from the class, but that you just kind of naturally have happen once you get into it. So I know my unit and I would be on FaceTimes and just discussing through kind of ideas that we were processing, and that became kind of like Claire said, something that almost took over my life in a sense, but in a very good way, because I've definitely emerged as a better person because of all those hours.
Another definite thing to do is take advantage of the time you have with people who know what they're talking about, whether that be teachers or later on in the year, people from other units. When other people know what they're talking about in areas that you're not as much of an expert in, you should definitely draw on that knowledge and take notes and find ways to integrate that into creating new perspectives for you to look at your problems from.
Personally, I think that history doesn't repeat itself, but it does rhyme. So I think for me personally, like as Unit 1, especially reading about like the history of America and like government in general, I think and seeing how our rights have developed over time, I think studying up on like history is a great indicator of like what direction our country is heading in towards in the future.
I would like to second everything that everyone has said, but also a big part of We the People is being able to think and decipher things for yourself. Being a part and alumni of this class, we have gained the ability to be free thinkers and to be able to, as William said, decipher through the flashy headlines and the misinformation that is spread throughout the media. So I think that is extremely important, not just because we're 18 or about to turn 18 and about to become active citizens, but we can also share that information and what we've learned with other people. And I feel like that is just very, very important, and I wouldn't trade it for the world.
So I have one last question, and I think I've noticed that a lot of times in your rights discussion, you talk about where rights come from. So William, you mentioned no such thing as a universal understanding of rights, right? And so I wonder, how do you guys think that the specific places that you guys worked in affected your idea of where rights come
from? Yeah, that's a great question. I think that having worked in Unit 5, I definitely kind of at the beginning of the year had this sense of like, okay, the Bill of Rights has everything we need. And I guess I became kind of disillusioned with that throughout the year. And now understand that I guess it comes more from the citizens than from one document, and that it is ever evolving based on modern circumstances. It's something that's talked about by James Madison in Fed 48, kind of the concept of the Bill of Rights itself being a parchment barrier. And I think that over time I've come to realize that it comes from people and modern changes. May I finish my thought? A document.
Thank you guys so much. So I'm gonna start out with some feedback for you guys. I think your testimony was very good, and I love your incorporation of evidence and quotes. You maybe could have used like a few more hard facts, but I understand that this is a difficult topic to find evidence on. But in your hot seat answers, I think your evidence was very strongly personal anecdote. And so I think that maybe a few more citations, court cases, constitutional application, you always need that constitutional application in there. But otherwise, I thought your answers were very good. You need to cut down on the 4-person answers. Probably only 1 per testimony, if that. And also your answers were really long. So if you were able to go through a little more quickly, we get to ask you more questions and we have more fun all around. Okay, overall, I think you guys did an awesome job, and I'm going to turn this over to my fellow judges.
Okay, I'll go. So I thought your testimony was well balanced. I thought the rights section was a little bit larger than I would have preferred it to be in relation to citizenship. I think you could have bared down on citizenship a little bit more. I think you're again, I would like to echo what Anna said. You know, those 4-person answers are definitely something to look out for. It was noticeable to me that some of you were from Foothill and some of you were from Amador. But I'd like to say there are some discrepancies in your language that you guys use within your testimony between what you guys believe in, and I think that comes down to your histories. But I mean, I think it was interesting to see how your background in units showed through in that testimony. But overall, a really great job, and well established, and well done.
Starting with your testimony, I really liked how first someone started with the question that Mr. Dedamore asked, and then it circled back to that at the end. So it's just a nice way to tie the introduction and the conclusion together in testimony. As for Q&A, I echo what the other judges have said about having a lot of 4-person answers and maybe just cutting that down and working more on balance overall. But I still think that you guys did a really good job in bringing in a more personal aspect to both your Q&A and testimony times. And I think that you guys did a great job overall.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much all for coming back and doing this. I want everyone to know that these awesome alumni have spent their free summer time putting together this panel answer and giving feedback just to show you the importance of this program. And so I really want to thank you all for coming today to present. I think you did an excellent job. If you want to stick around to help out later with the breakout rooms, you're welcome to, but if you want to head off, that's fine too. At this point, we're going to be taking a 10-minute break so everyone can get a chance to use the restroom, take a drink of water, get a snack, do what you need to do. We will be returning back at 11:10 a.m. Pacific Standard Time for those tuning in from another time zone. And so we will see you back then. When we come back, we're going to be going over what the score sheet looks like for this program, and then my personal favorite, the great debate. What is the most powerful branch of government? So be sure to tune back in at 11:10. See you soon. All right, party people. Hopefully everyone got a chance to take a quick break and can return now to the video chat so we can continue. If everyone could turn on their cameras just so that I know you're there, that would be wonderful. Can everyone hear me okay again? I switched my audio source. Okay, great. Really good to see all of you. Before we continue on with the presentations, do we have any stragglers who want to ask quick questions about anything that we've talked about so far today? Any questions? Okay. Yes, Clint.
I have a question for the alumni panel and the folks who judged them, if they're still here. Looks like many of them still are. Why did you do that? Why did you volunteer to come back on a Sunday where you got no credit to do that?
I thought you said we were getting civic virtue points for this.
That's a lot of credit.
I
think it's just kind of, I mean, I can speak for myself, and we've been talking about it a little bit, just kind of trying to hold on to what we the people gave us and trying to hold on to this engagement in a community that's so interested in things that literally only we are interested in, and we're super excited to pass down that excitement and inspiration onto the next generation of Wheatlers.
Also, I think I missed it a little bit. I felt that like emptiness that comes from like something that like takes so much of your life, like not being there anymore. So it felt good to be back. And then also like, I know like everyone who wrote or most people who wrote the testimony like share the sentiment, but like we want to share how excited we are about this program. And we want everyone who's like doing this next year to be like just as excited.
I echo everything that Anna and Verunavi just said. I love my time in the Comp Civics We the People program, and I just love seeing a new generation of people going through that same sense of self-discovering and finding their own voice in We the People competitions throughout summer sessions, and also seeing them develop that throughout the competition season is something that I would love to see, especially as a more recent alum.
I just joined, but I wanted to share why I joined. So I wasn't able to make it initially today because I had work, but some life things happened that have really been hurting me, and I ended up calling out on my shift today. And I just emailed Zoe and I was like, I'm really going through a lot and it would benefit me if I could join in. So I joined last minute, and the reason for that is just I found a community and I found my like passion here. And yes, like it's a lot of work, but like it's work that feels so fulfilling and it really cheers me up. So I'm really glad I was able to make it today.
I will add, if no one else can go. I think that like there's something about We the People that is kind of like addictive in a way. Like we've been talking about it a lot in our group chat. Like it just feels weird and unnatural to have like not been working throughout this past like month, and like we've kind of all been finding like ways to get in our little like Weeple fix, but like it feels very good to like be back here and actually like working with people that are gonna be starting on this whole journey that we just went through. It's something that I would like redo in an instant, and like I'm just like so excited for you guys, and I want to be there along the way to help, because it is something that's gonna like go far past just this year. And so I think that's like a big reason why all of us are coming back too.
All right, great. If anyone else wants to chime in, just let me know. But otherwise, thank you all for sharing that. Really appreciate that. And really excited to have you on the CACE team to help these new students with the program. So now we are going to head right on over to going over what the score sheet looks like for this program, and a little bit about certain aspects of the score sheet. So I'm going to attempt to share my screen. Let's see if that worked. Can everyone see this okay? Just give me like a thumbs up or a shaking a head. Okay, great. So this is what the score sheet generally looks like, except right here, instead of giving this little part, it's just going to be blank, and that's where the judge can put their number down. So, but this is sort of the rubric that all the judges are going to be given at every level of the competition, the sort of scoring guide in the different areas. So there are, as you can see on the left side here, 6 different categories for what you will be judging on. And I want you to all notice that although this competition is divided into a testimony and a Q&A period, it's actually not divided that way in the score sheet, meaning each of these 6 categories you'll be judged on in both the testimony and the Q&A. So it's really important that you nail each of these categories in both parts of your presentation. So if you just really answered every aspect and did a really well job in your testimony, but did none of these things in the Q&A, that's going to affect your ability to get a full score that you deserve. And so I think that's really important to keep in mind from the very start of this competition. So as you can see, each of the categories are worth about 10 points, and the judge will be able to go in through each of these to give up to 10 points in the category. And together that will be your total score. And in particular today, I want to go over 3 of these categories. We'll go over the rest of the categories in the next CACE Summer Session. So I'm going to be talking about understanding, reasoning, and understanding, responsiveness, and participation today. So this is the understanding category. It's to what extent did participants demonstrate a clear understanding of the basic issues addressed by the question? Now, this may seem pretty self-explanatory. However, I think a lot of people will not necessarily get the point on this question, because it's really important that when you are answering a question that a judge poses to you, or when you're writing in testimony, you're not only answering their question, but you're showing that you understood the point, the purpose of that question. And you do that by communicating evidence, reasoning, and other ideas. I would say this category ties in a lot of the other categories in the spreadsheet for that reason. So in particular, judges will be looking at, for points of 9 to 10, you're going to be looking for in-depth understanding. Are you doing the key concepts, themes, issues, relationships that they're really looking forward to? Are you showing you understand? So in the panel that you saw just before that, that is really important. They did a good job of showing understanding. When they were asked questions about, was it overwhelming to be part of the We the People program? They showed their understanding by showing you very different aspects of what overwhelming could be and at what point. So I know that William talked about how it varied at different levels of the competition, about how much they were overwhelmed and at what stage. I know Lily mentioned the beginning, getting a big packet of cases and not really knowing what to do with it. These things show through their answers they understood the basis for the question and were able to communicate the payoff and the differences in the themes related to that. And as you'll see is a common theme throughout this scoring guide, a lot of these things overlap with other categories. And so sometimes when you do one of these categories really well, it'll eke over into the other categories. And so that's a really good strategy for being high scoring. So next, when you have a good understanding, you're talking about the key concepts, identifying the things that are most significant, but maybe you're not expressing all the different aspects of it, the different viewpoints, showing that you understood the question. And then as you go from there, 5 to 6 points, you have an average understanding, you're getting sort of the key stuff, but you're not really describing fully your answers. And that shows that maybe you don't fully grasp the understanding of the question. And it goes on from there. Fair understanding, you get some concepts, but you're not really doing a good job of describing. And little understanding, you don't talk about very many concepts, and the ones you do talk about, you are not describing them adequately. Next, we are going to talk about responsiveness. This one is hugely critical as well, and somewhat similar to understanding. Are you answering the question that is being asked of you? It is very easy in We the People for the universe of questions and the universe of answers and content to feel relevant at any point in time. But it's really your job to make sure that you convey to the judge that you understand their question and that your answer responds to the question they're asking. We oftentimes have people who just give you a bunch of information and it's not quite responsive to what is being asked. So to get high scoring in these points, it's really important to somewhat try to restate the question, the answer. In your answer, restate the question that is being asked of you to make sure that the judge knows that you're answering it. And this is particularly important for the testimony portion where you have the questions written out ahead of time. This is your time to spend answering them. Make sure that you get every question and sub-question. You're answering the full sort of theme of the first one, as Erin showed you what the questions kind of look like format-wise, as well as hitting all the aspects of the sub-question. Sometimes it can be hard to link the main question and the sub-questions together. And those are the situations in which students often lack on the responsiveness because you get kind of most of it, but you are missing a key part of the question. So it's really helpful that once you first write your first testimony, to then go back to the district questions or whatever level of competition you're at and use that as a checklist. Where did I answer this part of the question? Here, here, and here, to make sure that you get every aspect. And sometimes these questions can be really long or complicated. And so you need to answer not only each question, but each part of each question. And that's sort of how it goes, 9 to 10, 7 to 8. It's just depending on how much of it are you being responsiveness for. And again, this is for the testimony and the Q&A period. And then finally, I'm going to talk about participation. Participation is the easiest points to get. You should be hitting it on the head every single time that you do a presentation, because really all it's asking is everyone on the team participating equally? Are you contributing meaningfully to the conversation, both in testimony and Q&A? So I think, as you could see from our wonderful alumni panel before, each person answered the question for each judge's question. They answered it, and they were very equal. It didn't seem like one person was dominating or having an especially long answer compared to others who were quieter. It really appeared like they were a team. And that is going to be critical as you go through the process. So even though you may later on, as Donna mentioned, have certain people specialize in certain aspects of the answers, it's really important that everyone is prepared and on board and doing the research and doing their part to be part of a team, so that you can appear and have equal participation throughout. So does anyone from CACE or the recent alumni have anything to add on what I just talked about today?
I've got something I want to mention on that participation score. Sometimes we will see one or two students who kind of dominate the Q&A session, especially. They're very verbose, they're confident, they're willing to get in quickly, and other people on their team who are maybe less aggressive or assertive in getting their answers in first or faster. But it's the responsibility of both types of people to work on the participation. So if you find that you're a dominant personality type, you tend to get in really quickly, you have a duty to pause, repress those tendencies a little bit, and let your teammates try to get in a sufficient amount of time. And if you're on the other end of the spectrum, you're not as quick to get in your answers, maybe you're a little less confident in yourself, which is totally fine. Really find the next gear to make sure you're getting an equal amount of participation. And you'll see that. You'll see how that works with your units once you get into these practice sessions. And it doesn't have to be perfect at first. It definitely won't be perfect at first. And you'll find that some people are just a little more verbose, and that's okay. And you'll work on fixing it between now and the competition.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Clint.
No. You go ahead, Zoe.
Thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to jump in really quickly on the responsiveness point. I think a habit that's really important for you guys to develop early on is when you are asked a question during Q&A to start with your answer, like yes or no, or I think XYZ, rather than jumping in with evidence. And you guys are going to see this sort of as you progress through the program. But most of the time, a lot of people have this tendency to get really excited about a piece of evidence that they want to share, but then forget to answer the question being asked of them. So for the sake of scoring better and for the sake of clarity, keep in mind to answer like, do you think the executive branch is stronger? You say yes, because evidence, rather than evidence, yes, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that was pretty much what I was going to say. The only thing that I would add on with regard to participation is, and it's one thing that we really hammer all the time, because as Sabrina said, it's the easiest 10 to get in every competition. It's also the easiest 10 to lose. It's the easiest way to lose a competition. And I've seen it so many times where a unit had fantastic content, great, wonderful evidence, some really great reasoning and really high levels of understanding. But if only 4 people of the 5-person unit got in during Q&A or hot seat, you're probably not going to get a 10 on participation, whereas everybody else is likely going to get that 10. So, this is one of the things about this program that really kind of breaks your brain a little bit, because I know that there are some people here who are, as Sean mentioned, a little bit less likely to speak up in a Q&A session, maybe a little bit shyer. And if that's you, that's okay, that's fine. You are going to learn how to get past that and really engage in the program. And in some ways, it's something that the program is designed to get you to do. And it will help you, not just in this program, but in whatever you decide to do going forward, to have that experience. So participation is something that we as an organization really, really care about, because we think it's, really oftentimes key between really good teams and not so good teams, or really successful teams and not so successful teams from a pure scoring standpoint. But more importantly, we just want you to get in there and mix it up, tell us what you're thinking, because that's more important in the long run.
Right, thanks all. Yeah, and I just want to add one other thing is a lot of this program is a bit of fake it till you make it in some ways, particularly at the start where you're still working to build your understanding and conducting your research about everything that's going on. We don't want you to wait until you feel like you've learned everything there is to know to be able to chime in on what's going on. You should be practicing that skill from the start, even if you don't know everything you need to know. It's a really critical thing to learn. And even when you get to the national competition, there are going to be some questions where you don't necessarily know or have the research or understanding to have a really concrete answer. Doesn't matter. You should still be participating and being engaged. It's really important to get those points. All right.
Can I just add one more thing?
Absolutely.
And another thing about exactly what you just said is that you're going to become more comfortable with having constructive feedback. We saw in the feedback section of the alumni panel and presentation, where the alumni judges gave some really, I think, good and constructive feedback that was critical of how they handled particular aspects of the question. And I think that's one thing that a lot of people, the first time they see a We the People program or We the People presentation, is they get a little surprised that there is that negative feedback. And alumni and judges will tell you that after a while you sort of crave it. You sort of crave that that constructive feedback. I have had people tell me, like, we really liked it when you tore this particular presentation or Q&A apart. And that's part of what Sabrina was just getting at, is the fake it till you make it, because that's what we're here to do. Nobody is going to judge you if you say something dumb or say something incorrect in a Q&A or in a presentation, because everybody has done it at various points, and we're here to guide you or to tell you, like, look, what you said here is inaccurate for whatever reason, and you can fix that. It's really just getting the experience of getting in there and mixing it up. And sorry, that's all I'll say.
All right, great. Does anyone have any questions for us about the rubric? As we talked about, we're going to go over in more detail the other aspects in the next one, but if you have any questions about responsiveness and participation, feel free, and understanding, you can throw a question in the chat or even talk on video if you'd like. Anyone have any questions? I see we're a bit of a shy group. Don't worry, we will get that right out of you as this year proceeds. All right, and even later today. Great, so now we're moving on to my personal favorite portion of this event, which is the epic battle for what is the most powerful branch. So we have some wonderful folks here today to debate this important question. I want you to understand this is not the typical format for We the People. It's not a testimony and group panel response, but instead a true competition. But still, you'll be able to hear some really important ways in which people can make an argument and then support that argument with evidence, and just get a sense of what we're working with here today. So I would like to invite everyone to turn off their cameras again, except if you are part of our panel, which is Clint representing the judiciary, Sean representing Congress, and Zoe representing the executive branch. I will be your MC today. And yeah, so if everyone could turn off your camera and then turn on the gallery mode so that you can see all the speakers presenting today. So first, so the overarching question is, which branch is the most powerful in the US government? And note, it is the most powerful, not the best branch, not the scariest branch, nothing like that. It's the most powerful. So keep that in mind when we're thinking about responsiveness and what we are getting at today. Later on, we're going to have breakout sessions where you can talk amongst yourselves with a CACE volunteer about who you think is the most powerful branch in light of what we've heard today in the debate. So first, we're going to have each of them talk about the founders' views of what the most powerful branch is for each of the branches and talk about their main arguments. Then we're going to have them discuss about how each of their branches have the ability to protect individual rights. And then we're going to have them talk about each of how their branches have the ability to promote the common good. So I'm going to hand it over to them to talk about their arguments. Go ahead.
All right, Clint, do you have a preference in what order we go in?
No, I actually don't. Do you have a preference?
I'll go first for the founder's view, since Article 1 is, of course, first and most important. And then we can do Article 2 and then Article 3 in that order. And then for the individual, I'll go second, and then for common good, I'll go last. So I'll rotate it in that way. Does that sound good?
Fair enough.
All right. Yes, as mentioned, Article 1 comes first in the US Constitution. Before I get there, the federal government was organized under the Articles of Confederation prior to our Constitution. And the framers of the Constitution found that to be quite lacking, and hence held a Congress in Philadelphia to come up with a new system of government. Some of the biggest problems when it came to power of the Articles of Confederation were a lack of taxing authority, a lack of power over interstate commerce, a lack of centralized power, and in particular, a lack of federal legislative supremacy. And so when the framers got together, they said, well, what should our new form of government be? And they were most focused on the legislative branch. This was in part because they had the most familiarity with legislatures. For example, the Virginia House of Burgesses and other legislative bodies were sort of the predominant forms of government in each of the colonies and then the states. And even the governing body that made the Constitution was called a Congress in Philadelphia. So these are all legislative bodies, and they thus wrote Article 1 as the longest section, encompassing more than half of the total words in the US Constitution document. And these words are primarily granting powers to Congress, powers and rights, including rights over the states. And in some cases, you'll see things like the Supremacy Clause establishes legislative supremacy, where the US Congress, the laws that it passes are the supreme law of the land. Additionally, they had some of the most powerful rights granted in the Constitution, including the power of the purse. If you look at Article 1, Section 9, Clause 7, the Appropriations Clause, and Article 1, Section 8, Clause 1, the Taxing and Spending Clause, you see that Congress really has the authority to regulate taxes and our commerce system within the United States. They also have a lot of war powers enumerated in Article 1, Section 8, such as the right to declare war, grant letters of marque and reprisal, make rules concerning captures on land and water, to raise armies, to provide and maintain a navy, to make rules for the government and regulation of land and naval forces, et cetera, et cetera. And so you see there's all of these powers granted specifically to Congress in Article 1, and that was Section 8 in particular. When it comes to the judicial branch, Congress also has quite a lot of power in the Constitution. The judicial branch is not just the Supreme Court, and Congress controls the body of the judiciary. Article 1, Section 8, Clause 9 grants Congress the specific right to constitute tribunals inferior to the Supreme Court. And so when it comes to providing for the court system, providing funding, providing rules, Congress is specifically the body with that power as granted by the founders. And we've seen that come about with things like the Federal Rules of Evidence, Federal Rules of Civil Procedure, certain authority granted to Congress to approve of the appointees of the president when it comes to federal judges and justices, and so on and so forth. And perhaps most importantly, Congress has been granted the necessary and proper clause, sometimes called the elastic clause. In Article 1, Section 8, Clause 18, Congress has the power to make all laws which will be necessary and proper for carrying into execution the foregoing powers, etc. And essentially, as Madison pointed out, in a Republican government, the legislative authority necessarily predominates, and we see that they have used this necessary and proper clause over the lifetime of our democracy, our republic, in order to pass laws that carry a lot of weight and must be followed by both citizens and states and other branches of government. Brutus I noted that the necessary and proper clause would usurp state power and trample on local and state rights. Maybe that was a valid fear. And he feared that it would usurp money from the states by eliminating any sovereignty or autonomy left to the states. I think we've seen over time that there is a valid system of federalism and the states still have quite a lot of power. But even so, under the necessary and proper clause and the supremacy clause, federal power predominates, and that comes straight out of the legislative branch. Hamilton in Federalist 33 said this was simply a truism, that along with the supremacy clause, the necessary and proper clause would be required in order to have a strong and powerful central federal government. And Madison agreed essentially in Federalist 44. At the Virginia Ratifying Convention, Patrick Henry took the opposing view, saying that the clause would lead to took the opposing view to something that Hamilton said, saying that the clause would lead to limitless federal power that would inevitably menace individual liberty. Again, I don't think we've quite seen that. I suspect Clinton will tell us why, but it certainly was something the founders were focused on at the time of the ratification and the founding. In addition to the necessary and proper clause, they also wrote the Commerce Clause in Article 1, Section 8, Clause 3, to regulate commerce with foreign nations, and among them the several states, and with Native American tribes. And it vastly extended the power of Congress, especially over time. We've seen a lot come out of the necessary and proper clause. A court case granted, Wickard versus Filborn, really opened the floodgates on this in 1942 by expanding, I think, the scope of how the necessary and proper clause has been viewed and utilized by Congress over time. And we see, for example, with Obamacare being passed, Chief Justice Roberts, when he looked at that in National Federation of Independent Businesses versus Sebelius, pointed out that the necessary the Commerce Clause was seeming to be a part of the rationale that Congress was using to pass that law, then which was approved by the president at the time. And it shows that there are many different powers along with the Commerce Clause, necessary and proper clause, and the taxing and spending clauses that all could be used to justify the enactment of laws like Obamacare, and that was ultimately upheld in that ruling. Hamilton, in particular, Gouverneur Morris, frequently pushed for greater executive power, but were rebuffed by people like Benjamin Franklin and the majority of Congress that really feared a monarchy and a tyranny, a demagogue, things of that nature. And so for better or worse, we found that there were limitations placed on things like the presidency with the Electoral College, placed on the Senate with the way it was originally elected by legislatures and not the populace. And these were designed to sort of limit the power of those branches of government. But ultimately, the Senate has now, through amendment, been elected directly by the people. The executive originally was also intended to be a council, but ultimately it became Benjamin Franklin and some others were proposing that, but ultimately it ended up being a semi-independent cabinet plus the presidency with Senate oversight. And so we see that the Senate has a lot of oversight in both approving cabinet members, approving justices to the Supreme Court and lower court justices. And so some of that power originally envisioned for the executive was actually given to the legislative branch in the Advice and Consent Clause, Article 1, Section 2, Clause 2. So I think we can see quite clearly that during the founding era, the legislature was the most powerful branch of government and certainly was envisioned by the framers to be the most powerful branch of government. All right, Article 2 is next.
All right, Article 2, the executive. As Sean was speaking, I was sitting here and I realized that I'm up against two real life lawyers. So cut me a little bit of slack. Disclaimer, what I'm going to be saying today is largely drafted by Beck Mikowski, who isn't here today, but she was so kind as to draft up the executive argument here today. So moving forward, I'll be using male pronouns because all presidents thus far have been male. Of all the branches of government, none were created by the framers with the powers vested in just one person, except for the executive. The president has the power to nominate judges as Supreme Court justices, as well as the cabinet. The framers saw these powers as dangerous enough to ensure checks on them by the legislative branch, such as advise and consent of nominations. But now, today especially, we see that a complicit or ineffective Congress, such as the filibuster, can lay helpless in the power of the executive in reshaping the judiciary and executive agencies. Upon the framing of the Constitution, America had just survived the Revolution and the Articles of Confederation. Shays' Rebellion showed the massive weakness of not having a centralized power to raise taxes or an army, thus indicating the need for a strong centralized government, especially an executive. In Federalist 70, Alexander Hamilton argues for a strong executive leader directly as a result of how weak the executive was under the Articles of Confederation. Granted, nobody wanted another monarch like King George III, and ensured there wouldn't be because of the election. But America did need a separate president with executive powers to enforce federal laws, sign or veto legislation, wage war, and conduct foreign policy. As Hamilton said, energy in the executive is a leading character in the definition of good government. With only a few limits, whatever the president wants, the executive branch will deliver. He even has the power to wage war without ever consulting Congress, as long as he doesn't call it war, as we've seen in the decade-long war in the Middle East. According to Madison's Notes of Debates in the Federal Convention of 1787, the executive did not receive much attention in the debates, leading to relatively ambiguous text of Article 2, which is a weakness that has been exploited by presidents to expand their power since the beginning of the nation, really. That's why, as Hamilton desired, the executive is the most powerful branch of government today. Does the potential for power really matter when reality proves its exercise to be ineffective? Can a branch of government really be considered powerful when it's lost the ability or the means to flex the muscles given to it by the Constitution? Considering the evolution of executive power in modern history, such as through the New Deal, I contend that it matters not what the founders thought as to what is the most powerful branch of government today, but the actual practice and reality of it.
Yeah, I completely agree, Zoe. Thank you for that. It does matter more what the actual practice of power has been. But let's start a little bit of background on the judicial branch, because it really demonstrates how the judicial power has grown from what the founders thought would be quite minimal to what I would argue is unquestionably the most powerful branch of government in America today. So the Article 3, which lays out the judicial power, is the shortest of the 4 substantive articles of the Constitution. It says basically the judicial power of the United States is vested in one Supreme Court and such inferior courts as Congress decides. And I think many of you have heard the term that nature abhors a vacuum. Well, friends, I would argue that power also abhors a vacuum. And the founders set out this very, very short Article 3 and said, go get it, guys. They said, in fact, that judges who are confirmed under Article 3 serve for life as long as they exhibit good behavior. Now, they are subject to impeachment as laid out in Article 2, Section 4, but literally no Supreme Court justice has ever been impeached. Or sorry, only one Supreme Court justice has been impeached, and that was Samuel Chase in 1804. His nickname was Old Bacon Face, which is the greatest nickname in judicial history. And because of that nickname, he was not convicted and he got to serve out his term. Probably not because of that nickname, but I'm going with it. There's also a limitation on the judicial power. That's the cases and controversies requirement. That just simply says that facts matter when cases are brought before the Supreme Court. Indeed, compensation for the Supreme Court can't be changed based on what they are doing or not doing. That is true of other lower court judges as well. And as Sean mentioned, the justices on the Supreme Court, as well as on many of the lower courts, are appointed by the executive and confirmed by the Senate. It's very, very limited. There are very, very few limits on power. Sean mentioned that Article 1 is the most substantive article in the Constitution, and that's true. But the reason it is so substantive is because the founders were placing limits on what Congress could do. they didn't do the same thing with the judiciary. In fact, they didn't think much about the judiciary at all. In Federalist 78, Hamilton says that, he says, first of all, that the judiciary is the weakest branch. And as I will, I think, conclusively demonstrate, Hamilton was dead wrong on that. But he also says that in Federalist 78, that essentially judicial review is supposed to happen. He says, quote, "The courts were designed to be an intermediate body between the people and the legislature." Meaning he's saying that the courts are designed to separate the legislature from the people, to say when the legislature have overstepped their bounds. He further says, whenever a particular statute contravenes the Constitution, it will be the duty of the judicial tribunals to adhere to the latter and disregard the former. In other words, adhere to the Constitution and disregard whatever Congress decides to do. He says that the interpretation of the laws is the proper and peculiar province of the courts, meaning judicial review. Now, this is one of my hobby horses, and I'm just going to do a very slight digression. Most people, when they think of judicial review, they think Marbury versus Madison in 1803, and John Marshall just decided, hey, we've got judicial review based on this case. As you go forward in this competition and in your studies, I think you will realize that that's not entirely accurate, because as I've just pointed out, in Federalist 78 in 1788, Hamilton is talking about judicial review. So really what the big deal about Marbury, it was the first case to strike down an act of Congress, to say to Sean's branch, whatever you did, that's not going to fly, and invalidated the act entirely. And that, my friends, is why the judicial branch is so powerful, because they have the most powerful check that any branch has against any other branch. It's the same check, it's judicial review. And as I will talk about in great length later, or hopefully not great length, at some length later, judicial review can and will be used and has been used very powerfully against both branches just in the last few months even. Judicial review, I've been making this argument now for 5 years or so, and everybody's like, the judicial branch, they're not doing much these days. Well, friends, I don't know if you've been paying attention, but the Supreme Court is doing a whole heck of a lot. And as Sabrina said at the beginning of this debate, it is not about whether you're using your power wisely or well, but just whether or not you have it. And the judicial branch has been using judicial review so powerfully lately, we'll talk about how, that in my mind, there is no debate as to which is the most powerful branch in American government today. Sure, Congress, as Sean pointed out, could theoretically strip the jurisdiction of the Supreme Court or change the appellate court if they wanted to. But when has Congress done literally anything lately? They can't get out of their own way. Between the two houses and the filibuster, they can't get anything done. So that's just frankly not going to happen. They could theoretically, yank compensation, but that's not going to happen. Moreover, the executive branch, sure, they get what they do, whatever the president tells them to do, but who gets to decide what the limits of the executive power are? It's the judicial branch, and they have done so. They have prevented, in many ways, the executive, as we've seen both with President Biden, with President Trump, and President Obama, from effectuating executive orders, from effectuating rules that are passed down by executive agencies, by declaring that those executive agencies and those executive orders have gone beyond the judicial power. So yeah, most of the checks on the Supreme Court these days are internal. They're self-imposed checks. They're the political question doctrine, which my colleagues might bring up later, or the ripeness and mootness doctrine. But again, those checks could be gotten rid of at any time. And in fact, the Supreme Court itself decides whether or not to use them. Congress can't say you can't, or Congress could theoretically, I guess, say that you can't use the political question doctrine to determine certain types of cases, but the Supreme Court, A, gets to decide whether that action is constitutional, and B, could get rid of it if it wanted to. So yeah, it's judicial review, friends. It is just the most powerful check, and therefore it is wielded by the most powerful branch.
Ding, 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 ding. That's the end of round one. Thank you all for making your arguments. We're now going to proceed to round two, and that is each of you must describe how your branch protects individual rights. Why don't we start off with the...
Let's actually do Zoe and then Clint and then me. I'll switch to the end. I think that makes the most sense.
Sounds good.
And I would actually like to say for all of you following along that from this moment forward, you could do a little bit of interaction if you'd like. And in the chat, if you would like to list what you believe are some of the most important federal laws, not amendments, but actual federal laws or executive actions or cases that impact our individual rights, which is the section we're about to cover, that would be swell. So let us know what you think are some of the most important powerful federal laws, executive actions or orders, and individual rights. And with that, I'll turn it over to Zoe.
Sorry, one more thing. We will be having an open question period after we finish each round where you can ask the panel to questions to help us get a better understanding of who is the most powerful branch. So start thinking of those questions now.
Cool. I will start off then with the ability to protect individual rights. As President Obama once said, "As president, I have no greater responsibility than protecting the American people." The president swears an oath to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States, which includes the individual rights enumerated in that document. In the 60s and 70s, for example, US presidents showed their commitment to international human rights by the executive signing, without the legislator ratifying, several major human rights treaties, including the International Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination, the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, and the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights. During the Carter administration, respect for human rights even played a role in determining foreign policy. One of the strongest powers that the president has used to unilaterally protect individual rights is the executive order. FDR himself issued more than 3,000 executive orders during his administration, which is an obscenely massive amount and fundamentally changed the shape of American economic and political policy. For example, here are some executive orders on human rights throughout US history. President Obama provided protections for LGBT employees in Executive Order 13672. President Clinton implemented human rights treaties through his executive orders. Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation, which I think is a non-negotiable, highly important act of political human rights protections. Truman desegregated the military. Eisenhower federalized the National Guard to desegregate schools in Little Rock, Arkansas. Kennedy established the President's Committee on Equal Employment Opportunity. And just recently, we've been talking a lot about how the judiciary and the legislature have been acting out, but considering the recent legislation surrounding abortion, President Biden has promised to sign into action an executive order that protects the right to abortion. Additionally, presidents have exercised deferred action or a choice to not use enforcement powers to further advance individual rights, like President Obama easing enforcement of federal marijuana laws, which has significant social and political implications beyond just the application of laws, or the deferred action for childhood arrivals, the DACA policy. Clearly, the power to determine when and how laws are applied makes the president unilaterally powerful in protecting and furthering individual rights. Considering that the power to appoint Supreme Court justices is vested in the president, it's clear that the executive has a very strong hand in how the Supreme Court plays out. With President Trump ultimately informally packing the court in the past few years, it's clear that the executive has a heavy hand in how the Supreme Court plays out. The president has the power to veto legislation that they deem not protecting individual rights. So clearly the executive has a very strong hand in overhauling actions by the judiciary and the legislative branch in the realm of protecting individual rights.
Well, I would argue that regardless of how heavy a hand the executive might have in picking the judiciary, once they're on the judicial branch, the executive has virtually no influence whatsoever on what the judicial branch decides to do about individual rights. And look, friends, both of my colleagues are very, very good. They're very, very smart. And they're going to make, I think, very interesting and nuanced arguments about individual rights. But there is no debate, no real debate as to which branch has had more impact, more powerful impact about individual rights than the judiciary. We see some folks who are dropping some cases that came down somewhat recently, some not so recently, that were directly impactful for everybody's individual rights in ways that no executive action and no action by Congress have ever been. Indeed, it was the judicial branch that came up with the whole idea of incorporation. You guys will talk about incorporation a lot. You're probably already somewhat familiar with it, but it was the process by which the Supreme Court, not the other branches, decided that the Bill of Rights, the Federal Bill of Rights, applies to the states, largely applies to the states, almost entirely. In fact, in backing up, Zoe mentioned the executive order emancipating some of the slaves, not all of the slaves, but the Supreme Court before that practically started the Civil War by issuing a ruling in Dred Scott v. Stanford, made it absolutely inevitable. And so when you think about it, when you go through the process of incorporation, you go through the process of interpreting the 14th Amendment, it becomes very, very clear that each individual right that we as Americans hold dear has been directly decided upon one way or the other by the Supreme Court. And Zoe points out in the chat, the judicial branch has historically denied individual rights. Well, that's absolutely true. But again, they have the power to do so. They have the power to grant and they have the power to deny. But let's not even go there. We don't have to go for what they haven't done. Let's look at what they actually have done. Because was it Congress who determined that the 14th Amendment incorporated the Bill of Rights to the states? No, it was not Congress, it was the courts. Did Congress pass a law to limit the executive war powers? Well, they tried to, but the only branch to effectively limit the president's war powers has been the judicial branch in Youngstown Sheet and Tube Company v. Sawyer in 1952. Did Congress pass a law desegregating education? No, that was the Supreme Court in Brown v. Board in 1954. Did the executive, pass or sign an executive order or issue an administrative rule that got rid of anti-miscegenation laws? No, the Supreme Court did in Loving v. Virginia. Congress didn't establish the right to privacy. That was the courts, Griswold v. Connecticut. Congress passed, and we mentioned this, somebody mentioned that in the chat recently, the Voting Rights Act. Congress passed this Voting Rights Act way back in the 60s. It's designed to protect everybody's right to vote, specifically in states that are historically hostile to that right to vote. Well, guess what the judiciary did to it in 2012? They gutted it because they had the power to do so in Shelby County v. Holder. The executive didn't sign an executive order legalizing same-sex marriage. That was the Supreme Court in Obergefell. So, I mean, we can talk about, and we should also talk about, how the Supreme Court has limited rights, has taken rights back. We have mentioned Dobbs, or at least alluded to Dobbs many times in this, and it will be, you guys will be talking about Dobbs certainly for the rest of this year, hopefully not for the rest of your lives, but it is one of the most impactful decisions that has come down in my lifetime, rolling back an individual right to bodily autonomy. And we're seeing how that power used by the Supreme Court unwisely and unconstitutionally, not unconstitutionally, but not in any way the decision that I would support, but by using that power, they have dramatically shifted individual rights for everybody in the United States for the foreseeable future. And so I would argue that, at least in terms of individual rights, in terms of the power to affect individual rights, there is absolutely no question which branch is the most powerful.
Well, that's interesting because there's a lot of interplay between these branches, and I would assert that none of those cases that Clint has mentioned, those abilities of the Supreme Court, come about without Congress first having passed a law. And so when we look at all of the things that Clint has been mentioning with these cases, they all come out of specific laws and amendments that have been passed by Congress, most importantly, the 14th Amendment to the US Constitution. John Bingham wrote in large part that amendment in Congress, and it was drafted and moved forward through Congress and has led to this expansion of rights, along with other Reconstruction amendments, the 13th Amendment, the 15th Amendment, specifically in relation to the enforcement powers that were enumerated in those amendments that have allowed Congress to pass law after law after law, protecting individual rights through due process, through substantial and procedural due process, the Equal Protection Clause, and the Privileges and Immunities Clauses that we see in that amendment. We've seen things come out of Congress like the Civil Rights Act of 1964, including Title VII, Title IX, that have allowed the court to weigh in on these issues. For example, in Bostock versus Clayton County, Georgia, the court said the language of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 prohibits sex discrimination and applies discrimination based on sexual orientation and gender identity. Yes, the court is getting involved, but the court is only involved because of laws that have been passed by Congress, sometimes, very difficult, through very difficult circumstances. Other laws that come to mind are the Environmental Protection Act. I'm an employment attorney, so of course I think of OSHA, protecting safety conditions in the workplace, minimum wage laws, all kinds of things out there that protect individual rights that have come out of Congress. We've heard a lot about the Voting Rights Act. And so certainly that's a powerful law. It has been limited in recent years. And I would argue that's the Supreme Court limiting rights, not protecting rights, just as we've talked about with Dobbs versus Jackson Women's Health Organization this year. And so these cases that are coming out of the Supreme Court are in direct response to or directly because of the power wielded by Congress in passing all these laws, and they don't exist. These cases don't exist without Congress wielding that power. Similarly, we've seen the legislature overriding executive orders. For example, during the Trump administration, the DACA legislation that was passed by Congress was subverted by executive order, and we saw some congressional act to override that executive order. And we've also seen things like the Naturalization Act, which was a big focus of the last administration. That's something that came directly out of Congress regarding power related to immigration, wielded by the president in that instance. And Clint has also mentioned Youngstown, but I want to point out with the Youngstown case, that's specifically the court articulating how powerful Congress is with respect to the presidency, basically ruling that the presidential administration can't supersede the power of Congress. And so while it's the court pointing that reality out, it is in fact the power of Congress that the court is pointing out in the Youngstown case as being an area where the executive branch cannot issue orders if Congress has already stepped into that area of the law, whatever that area might happen to be. In addition, when we see these cases come out of the Supreme Court, there's often an opportunity for Congress to abrogate or change the law in response to the Supreme Court. So for example, we've seen the Lilly Ledbetter Act passed in 2009 in response to court cases from 1998 through 2007. Lilly Ledbetter Act provides equal protection for women when it comes to pay in the workplace. And then we've also seen opportunities where the Supreme Court itself has said, well, if Congress wants to change our ruling, It certainly can. Thinking of Shelby County versus Holder with regard to the Voting Rights Act changes, Citizens United versus the Federal Election Commission in 2010, the court can certainly step in, the legislature can step in and make changes that would undo those rulings from the Supreme Court. And I think we're seeing the same thing right now with Dobbs versus Jackson's Women's Health Organization, where there's some momentum in Congress. And in fact, the House has just passed some laws to protect the right to abortion, women's bodily autonomy through legislative action. And we hope to see some of that continue to trend through Congress this year before the end of the term. So for all of these reasons, Congress is there to protect individual rights and has passed numerous laws doing so, including amendments to the Constitution.
Okay, that's the end of round 2. And now we are moving to round 3. Each of you explain how your respective branches protect and promote the common good. I think we're going to start with Sean. Oh, no, Clint. Sorry. Starting with Clint.
Yeah. So I think if anybody has any doubts as to which branch is the most powerful, just think back about how Republicans have fought tooth and nail in lockstep to, for example, prevent Merrick Garland from taking Justice Scalia's seat, to elect Donald Trump for the sole purpose of filling that seat Kavanaugh to gain a more solid GOP majority, and then look at how quickly they confirmed Amy Coney Barrett after RGB died. They think it's the most powerful branch, and I tend to agree with them. But let's talk about the common good, folks. Let's talk about which branches have that ability to affect, the power to affect the common good. I would argue that the very concept of the courts in general is an expression, a powerful expression of the common good. Courts, Supreme Court and the lower courts, courts in California, courts in other states, are places to resolve disputes, big and small, disputes about fundamental rights, some of the ones that we've been talking about so far, and disputes about smaller things. Did you break your contract with me? Was I wronged? So the actual presence of the courts provides that common good. So you're not out there willy-nilly. It's not the Old West and everybody's deciding their disputes themselves. It's there theoretically so that everyone can use it equally and everyone is subject to it equally. I understand that those are theoreticals, but that is true of everybody here. So the branch itself is also a reflection of the rule of law to the extent that that matters. And the rule of law, as you guys will talk about much more, is another aspect of the common good. There have also been a long line of cases where the Supreme Court has, in good ways and bad ways, affected directly the common good. In 1905, there was a case called Jacobson v. Massachusetts that said, and this is sort of relevant to today's world, that mandated vaccines for the common good are constitutional and a justifiable use of state power. And Jacobson was broadly upheld in several cases last couple of terms, including South Bay Pentecostal v. Newsom. Now, that's not to say that the Supreme Court has always acted wisely when it came to how mandatory vaccines or vaccines in general or public health orders in general should be adjudicated. As many of you know, the judiciary writ large also invalidated a nationwide mask mandate on airline travel that was put in by the executive, and they invalidated it just for funsies because the judicial branch decided it didn't like that. So again, remember, the question isn't about who uses the power for the most good. It's who is the most powerful branch in this area of common good. And you guys are students in 2022. And one of the reasons I would argue that that students in 2022 have to know so much about gun laws and shootings is because the Supreme Court has used its power in this area to declare that there is an individual right to own all sorts of guns and carry them in dangerous places. Now, I'm not endorsing any of that. I'm not saying it's good, but what I'm saying is that the Supreme Court has that power and it wields it how it wants to use them. Sean mentioned earlier that there was some Commerce Clause, or some cases that were based on the Commerce Clause. And I think that that's, those cases, those laws that were passed based on the Commerce Clause, the Interstate Commerce Clause, were really important. But of course, it always comes back to the fact that the limits of the Commerce Clause are decided by the judicial branch, not by Congress and not by the executive. Same thing with equal protection cases. The limits of those cases are decided by the judiciary. Same thing with, the Sebelius case that Sean mentioned. The limits of the congressional efforts to promote the common good are once again decided by the judiciary. And so again, this is one of those things where Congress and the executive can talk all they want about what they could do, what they have done. But at the end of the day, the branch that decides that what they have done or could do is kosher is the judicial branch. It always is, because there is no limit to the judicial review check. And that's my argument.
Well, it's interesting you mentioned the Commerce Clause again, because yes, the Supreme Court did weigh in on that with Wickard versus Filborn 80 years ago, but in doing so, it's really opened the floodgates for Congress utilizing the Commerce Clause to pass all kinds of laws, and essentially almost everything in the economy is interstate commerce at this point. It's hard to find something that Congress can't choose to regulate under the Commerce Clause at this point in our history. And so, Congress wields these incredibly powerful Article 1 constitutional powers. But I guess I will start there. Actually, Article 1, Section 8 begins, "The Congress shall have power to lay and collect taxes, duties, and imposts and excises, to pay the debts and provide for the common defense and general welfare of the United States." It's right there in the Constitution that the legislative branch is the branch designed to protect and uphold the common good of the United States. They do so through the power of the purse, which I mentioned earlier. For example, levying taxes and deciding on government funding to prevent the government from shutting down, as it's threatened to do from time to time. The 16th Amendment to the Constitution, passed in 1913, adopted an income tax, which has greatly expanded that power of the purse ever since that time for the last 110 years or so. And so through that expansion, through a constitutional amendment, Congress has had all kinds of funds to wield as the most powerful economy in the world. Speaking of power expansion, Congress has more power now that they can meet all of the time without having to use horses or Morse code or something to try to communicate with each other. Congress is meeting more than they ever did, or the founders ever envisioned they would, to pass laws for the purpose of furthering the common good. This can be seen through things like streets and roads, the Federal Highway Act of 1956, the Department of Transportation, the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration that have been established by Congress to protect and upkeep our streets and roads and highways and things. The police powers we've seen coming out of Congress, our education system at one time was funded through congressional grants. The aviation laws that were passed to establish the Federal Aviation Administration, things regulating our navigable waterways, legislation governing our military bodies, laws protecting us from white-collar crime and predatory lending, e.g. the Dobbs-Frank Act, which I won't get into too much for obvious reasons. But there's also immigration laws and things like that. All of these have come out of Congress. And they've passed quite a few laws protecting health and safety and our workplaces. For example, OSHA, the Fair Labor Standards Act, the National Labor Relations Act. The CARES Act was passed early in the pandemic to provide some funding for individuals struggling during the pandemic. The Families First Coronavirus Response Act is something I still deal with, or the fallout from that with regard to sick time provided to individuals during the coronavirus pandemic. Infrastructure bills. I saw someone in the chat even mention the Patriot Act. You could argue whether that promotes the common good or not, but certainly it was intended to. The Voting Rights Act, the Civil Rights Act we've already mentioned. All of these things are there and have been passed by Congress to further the common good and really affect our day-to-day lives. And Congress can sort of create and reduce the power of state agencies that oversee and enforce these laws at any time. Additionally, things like FEMA come right out of Congress. They control the funds directed to states, directed to these agencies that can be utilized to protect the common good when we see emergencies take place. And it all comes through the supremacy clause of the Constitution, where Congress regulates these powers and can impose its will over the states. We talk about this thing called occupying the field. So if Congress is occupying the field of a certain area of the law, for example, environmental policy, it prohibits other branches of government and the states from stepping in and overriding what Congress is choosing to do when it comes to regulating these areas for the common good. And we see that they can even control the executive branch through things like the AUMF, where they grant and can control the wartime powers given to the executive branch. And so we even see that the executive has a hard time directly overseeing the powers given to his own agencies, because Congress has these regulatory powers where they can investigate these agencies, and they have their own sort of power to act outside of the president. For example, the FBI, we saw, under President Trump, was really an independent actor, and then was additionally, Congress has engaged in these investigations over the actions of the executive branch and where they have fallen down on the job. And of course, Congress can defund any of these agencies as they wish. Clint doesn't like to hear this, but certainly Congress has control over the judicial branch when it comes to things like the federal rules of evidence, the federal rules of civil procedure, funding for different bodies of the judiciary branch. The appointment of justices was held up for a long time by Congress purposefully. That's an area where Congress is wielding its power for better or worse. And we can see that Congress can impose its will on these other branches. And even the example Clint gave earlier about having a seat stolen from one party to the other with Judge Garland, that's the Congress wielding its power in a way that it believes is promoting the common good, at least the people who are wielding that power in that moment. And I will also point out that we just don't see a lot of vetoes. The executive branch might argue, oh, we have this veto power, but it just doesn't happen. President Trump only had 10 vetoes. President Obama only had 12 vetoes. President Bush only had 12 vetoes. And so we just don't see that these checks are being wielded against Congress, for better or worse, when it's passing this legislation. All right, that's what I've got for that.
All right, last bit, final stretch. What's really, really special and unique about the executive branch is that it can act unilaterally to give itself more power. There's like a very historic trend of how the president and the rest of the executive branch has massively expanded in its role since the founding era to promote the common good. The president takes the oath to faithfully execute the laws by deciding what the laws mean and how they can best be enforced. Nothing in the government can happen without the president, the executive branch's agency. A really, really strong historical example is the New Deal, which I'm sure we're all very familiar with, but there was a massive expansion of the welfare state, unilateral action by the president, and fundamentally changed American economy and governance for the better to battle the Great Depression. And like I was saying, that's what's so special about the executive branch. It can act unilaterally. It's not beholden to 9 justices. It's not beholden to 500 plus representatives that are all arguing and fighting with each other. The executive has the power to act unilaterally. Not to mention that the president acts as the commander-in-chief of the military. Whether or not you think the military is for the common good, we can take the opinion that it is. The budget for the American government, for the military, is somewhere in the ballpark of $2 billion. I believe it takes up the biggest portion of our annual budget. So clearly the power of the sword is very, very strong today with the executive branch. But for being able to wage war in the Middle East without officially declaring war with congressional assent shows how the president can circumvent the limits on wartime powers that Sean mentioned earlier. In addition to the military state, the administrative state, is actually massive and significantly important to our daily lives and to the common good. Things like the FDA, the EPA, Department of Defense, education, homeland security, housing, labor, justice, and state all benefit the common good. We would be half dead and there'd be poison in all of our beauty and food products if the FDA didn't exist. We would be closer to, you know, worldwide global destruction if the EPA didn't step in. We wouldn't have the education we're lucky to have today if the US government wasn't responsible for that. Ultimately, the administrative state, as extensive and bureaucratic as it is, they do the heavy lifting. You know, Congress, you can tell us, you can claim that you're doing all this, but who's the one that's really enforcing everything that's happening in the federal government to best benefit the people? Congress, respectfully, can't even ratify the Equal Rights Amendment, which is so fundamental, I think we can generally agree, to the common good. President Biden is kind of flouting judicial power by overriding the Dobbs decision and handing down that executive order. There's a clear ability of the executive to act unilaterally and give itself more power. Not to mention that the court only has power based on their own legitimacy. There's no real enforcement. And considering the trajectory of where the court is going, it seems to be losing that legitimacy. And then what happens? The Supreme Court has generally, like I said in chat, denied rights that advance the common good. The limited scope of Brown v. Board of Education was enforced by the executive. There's also the agency very, very present of COVID-19 and how the CDC has played a heavy, heavy hand in advancing the common good. I think we can generally agree that fighting COVID is for the common good, and whose responsibility is that but the executive branch. Clearly, I think the really special, unique power of the executive to really take action without being beholden to any other parties is the strongest aspect of how it's able to advance the common good, and has such a presence in our lives that there's no doubt that the executive branch is the most fundamentally reliable branch to advance the common good.
Wonderful. Thank you all for answering our questions. Now we're going to open it up to the open question period. In the interest of time, I ask our panelists to keep your answers relatively short so we can go through a couple of questions. So if you have a question, please put it in the chat right now. And I can start us off with the question: how does each branch's legitimacy in the eyes of the public affect its power?
I'll start.
Go ahead.
Okay. No, go ahead. Go ahead.
I would argue that it doesn't in a lot of ways. So looking at the legislative branch, I think the players who are controlling the strings in Congress often don't care very much. We'll see some individuals not get reelected, but Mitch McConnell continues to get reelected. And so I think in large part, they're more focused on the power and less focused on the public perception of that power.
Yeah, so I would argue that many people would argue that legitimacy is the currency of the court, and that's true to an extent, because the court may be losing sort of the idea, like the support of the public, but the problem with the court or the thing that makes the court so powerful is that nobody can vote out Brett Kavanaugh, or nobody can vote out anybody in the Supreme Court if they don't like what they're doing. They're there until they decide to retire. Theoretically, again, they could be impeached, but we all know Congress isn't going to do that. So, I mean, if Donald Trump doesn't get impeached, none of the Supreme Court justices are going to get impeached. They're going to be there until they die or decide that they want to retire. So legitimacy is relevant to the power of the Supreme Court. But unlike the other branches who are politically accountable, the Supreme Court is simply not, and can continue to act however it wants for life.
The presidency might be the exception. What do you think, Zoe?
Yeah, I was going to say, I think to some degree, I think for better and for worse, public perception and legitimacy is really important to the executive branch. I mean, the federal elections are so heavily publicized every 4 years. It's the most important election. I mean, the average American can hardly name who the representative is, can hardly name the three branches of the government, but they can always name who the president is. And for that reason, it's clear that the public's role in electing the executive is really significant to the executive's legitimacy. But that being said, no matter what, how the president acts is always going to be enforced, because the president isn't responsible for enforcing the rest of the executive branch. Whether or not we liked Trump, whether or not we like President Biden, they're vastly, vastly different on the different ends of the political spectrum. But what they did, regardless of how the public perceive them, is still in action. What they did is still in full force. And so for that reason, there's a very strong element of how the public views the election and the responsibility of the commander-in-chief, but also there's that unilateral self-sustaining efficiency of the executive branch as well.
All right, great. And now we have a question from James. So how does each branch interact with the people, and to what extent does that affect the power of each branch has?
Zoe, I feel like you should go first on this one again.
I think, for one, like I said, the administrative state is so massive. Most people don't necessarily think of the administrative state as the first thing when they think of the executive branch, but it is the thing that permeates our lives the most out of the three branches, considering just the administrative and bureaucratic issues that the executive state is responsible for overseeing. It is really, really powerful in that way, not to mention how important publicity is for our head of state is as well, with the bully pulpit, fireside chats, even Twitter nowadays, right? The executive is the face of the nation, and the people look to the president as the first person in terms of what the government is responsible for. Even if an act of Congress, even if it was an act of Congress, people are generally going to see the administration as the responsibility of the president and not, oh, representative, of the 15th district of Kentucky, right? So there's a very strong relationship between the people and the president, as well as the people and the administrative state.
Yeah, I think the same is true of Congress, or at least individual members of Congress. They are the direct body of persons that are supposed to represent individual groups of people. And so they do town halls, they do, all kinds of events. I've met my congressperson more than once. I've had different congress people over the years, and I met several of them. So, it's unlike, President Biden, I'm unlikely to ever meet. I have met my House member. I haven't met a senator yet. I've seen one from far away, but yeah, so I think there's a direct connection between the people and their representatives, especially in the House. And I think, at least for individual members, it does matter. I think they vote often, or they at least say things in public often that are designed to placate certain parts of their base. And so I think there are a lot of people who would vote for stricter gun regulations, for example, if it wasn't for the people they represent, likely voting them out in certain areas if they were to vote in certain ways. And so I think we see some of this tribalism happen a lot with House members. Whether that affects the power of Congress overall, I would say probably not, because the way the parties control the different houses, depending on who's in power. But for individual members, I think it does matter a lot, this interaction with the people, and whether they get to stay as a elected representative or not.
Yeah, I would say briefly that the public does interact with the judiciary quite a bit in the lower courts. Anybody can file a suit wherever they want and represent themselves and blah, blah, blah. It's not a good idea, but that happens a lot. As you get higher and higher, and certainly with the Supreme Court, they have virtually no interaction with the public whatsoever, or meaningful interaction with the public. And so they are not influenced. In fact, they try to say that they are absolutely not influenced by public opinion in any way. I don't necessarily believe that, but that's part of their power, is that they are politically insulated.
Okay, great. And then we have another question about ultimately who holds the power with the military. And so could you talk about how each of your branches interact and talk about it from there?
I think I'm the natural start to this answer. I mean, most simply put, the president is the commander-in-chief of the military, not to mention how, technically speaking, the president does need congressional assent to wage war, but the quote unquote war in the Middle East has been going on for years, and there's never been an official declaration of war. So there's that power of the executive to circumvent constitutional limits in order to expand their own power. And like I said, the budget of our tax money is going mostly toward the military. So there's a very strong, almost like a bloated sense of power in the military and in the commander-in-chief.
Yes, an interestingly complicated question because these branches all really interact a lot, especially Congress and the presidency. So we have the authorization for use of military force, granting of powers to the executive to wage war that we see come out of Congress. That's kind of how Congress, declares war in the modern age, which is a little funky. But so we saw one in 2002 with regard to Iraq, and then there was one in 2013 with regard to some actions in Syria. And so, Congress has quite a few war powers enumerated in Article 1 that I mentioned at the beginning of my presentation. I won't mention again, but, so Congress has all of these powers, and it starts with the power of the purse, and to get to this infrastructure and, bloated, wartime economy that we sort of inevitably have all the time right now, comes out of Congress, and they can, expand or retract the amount of funding going to the Pentagon, but it tends to be a lot of money, obviously.
Yeah, very briefly, the Supreme Court is not necessarily directly, or the judiciary is not necessarily directly involved in the military, but it has a lot of power and influence nevertheless. For example, the Congress passed the War Powers Resolution in 1972. I don't know, somebody's gonna, somewhere around there, which theoretically limits the power of the executive to wage war, but it's never been tested in court because the courts have decided that's a political question and we don't want to get involved. The courts could decide, for example, that the actions in Afghanistan or the actions in the Middle East were unconstitutional, and that might create some sort of constitutional crisis. Imagine that, a constitutional crisis. But they have decided not to. They have withheld that determination so as not to step in between that, in that interaction between Congress and the president.
All right, I'm loving all the questions in the chat, but I think in the interest of time, we're going to go to our breakout rooms, and you should raise these questions with the people in your room. So it's going to automatically assign you a breakout room, and then I'm going to split all the CACE people to sort of leave the breakout room. We're going to come back at 12:45 to this room to discuss our findings. In this room, you should be prepared to discuss who do you think is the strongest branch, the most powerful branch, and why. Be able to talk about the things you heard today and other things that you've been coming up with yourselves. And then when we come back, hopefully we'll have someone from each room report back what we heard, and then we'll do a final poll vote to see who indeed is the most powerful branch. So I'm going to open up the breakout rooms now. If you have any trouble, let me know, and you can type in the chat and I'll make sure you get to where you need to be. And also the alum would love to have you interacting in these rooms as well. I'm going to try and divide you equally, but if there's too many of you in one room, feel free to leave and go to a different breakout room. Okay. So the room is open now. Just waiting on a few stragglers. Okay, looks like we're all back. So can I raise your hand virtually if you would like to share what you talked about in your room today about who is the most powerful branch? Or you could literally raise your hand, or you could raise your hand with like the little.
Adam from Amador Valley is raising his hand.
Great, Adam. Let's hear it.
All right. So in my group, which was breakout room 2, we talked about how the judiciary branch was the most powerful because of its ability to strike down any law, and with how each Supreme Court justice serves for life. Or for example, if a congressman were to like mess up or something, like the next term, he'd just be like out of there, like they could just vote someone else. where if a Supreme Court justice to be kicked out, they'd have to do something like really bad, like have bad behavior and be impeached and kicked out. And we also talked about the executive being like the second most powerful, because the power to veto affects the Congress drastically, because a lot of times with Congress it's split about 50-50, or it's at least close, where it's almost impossible to get that 2/3 majority to overrule it, along with the executive's like power to be able to speak internationally and like execute stuff like that, along with like executive agencies like affecting Congress's like ability to pass laws or the laws they do pass.
Wonderful. All right. Anyone else want to share? Please raise your hand.
I know I don't want to make her speak, but I know Anushka in group 3 had an interesting argument that whereas when executive agencies want to do a rulemaking, they have to subject it to notice and comment and publish it in the Federal Register and all that kind of stuff, that Supreme Courts don't have to do that when they issue their opinions. I thought that was a good point.
Great. Does anyone have arguments for why the legislative branch is the most powerful branch?
I can add something if people are thinking. I mean, I'm not sure if it's completely consistent with I don't know what my exact stance is on this, but Sabrina did bring up the point that like we kind of think of the Supreme Court as like the final check on anything, but theoretically the legislative branch does have the power to like pass amendments. So that would be something that would kind of supersede Supreme Court decisions. So if they were to use that power more effectively, then theoretically they would have that. I would say that kind of gives them the upper hand.
And they also, if the Supreme Court is interpreting a statute that the legislature passed and they interpret it in a way the legislature didn't intend, they can always pass a new law to clarify that. And that does supersede what the Supreme Court has to say in interpreting that law. Does anyone have any arguments about the executive branch or anything else they want to share? You're not limited. There are no rules here. Well, there's some rules. Anyone else? Looks like. Okay. Well, this is an important question that you are going to be thinking about throughout your time with We the People. It's intertwined with all these different areas across units, thinking about the branches of government, how they interact, and like who holds the power and what does it mean to hold that power. So I encourage you to think about that as we go through the rest of the CACE Summer Sessions, as well as throughout this entire school year. So now I'm going to open up the poll, and it will be for the what is the most powerful branch. Please pick what you feel in your soul, even if we haven't discussed some of the arguments. Do what you think is right, and I will reveal the results in a little bit, but I just launched it now, so you should be able to see it now and interact.
I shouldn't vote, right?
No, everyone can vote.
Oh, nice.
I don't have the power to vote. But
Wait,
everyone else can.
I don't have the power to vote either. So
yeah, me neither. I do, but I won't if you don't.
Yeah, I don't think the hosts have the power to vote.
Wow.
I switched devices at one point, Sabrina, so I must have lost my host power.
Wow.
I have the most power.
It's the tyranny of the majority problem right here.
I'm not going to vote. Don't worry. If they can't.
All right, 38 out of 42 of you have voted. That's the people who have voting power. I encourage the remaining 2 people now to vote. I know it's a hard choice. Can everyone see the live results right now? I'm not sure.
Only the hosts.
Oh, all right.
Okay.
So I can't see the live results.
All right, there are 2 people that have not voted. 2 people. This isn't
one of them is Sean.
Other than Sean. Oh, okay, we have one more. It's very important you use your right to vote in this setting and in life.
Looks like they voted.
All right. I still have one person down, but oh, there we go. Okay, ending the poll. Let's see if I can share the results. All right.
Clint.
The judicial branch won. I would say he had the edge given the most recent developments in the law right now, but I will say the judicial branch has won several years in a row.
I think I won 2 years ago at the legislature. Did judicial win last year?
No, Sean won. I think he won last year.
Oh.
Okay, so I think so. I won one of the recent ones. Legislative branch won.
Sorry, I didn't mean to spread lies.
I should go check the YouTubes and we can see who the last 3 or 4 winners were.
Absolutely. Well, thank you all for participating. This concludes the CACE Summer Session 1. We look forward to seeing you at the next summer session. I will send you an email with the new Zoom link and the materials for that session as well. I know that one will also be interactive, so be prepared to have your camera on and to interact in breakout rooms and be prepared to participate. We appreciate your participation today and we hope you continue it going forward. After the end of all 3 CACE sessions, we will invite you to join our CACE Discord. Each school will have their own Discord, as well as a joint Discord where you can interact with each other and also ask us questions, and we can help. And that will be throughout the year. But in the meantime, before you get access to Discord, if you have any questions, you all have my email, hopefully, because I had sent you the link. It's just Sabrina, I don't know. Oh, it's Sabrina at CACiviceducation.org. If you have any questions, I can also send your questions on to somebody else if I don't know the answer. And unless anyone else has anything to add, you're free to go enjoy the rest of your weekend. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. It was great to see you all.